Number 12, Ole Miss, 9-point favorites against South Carolina. The over-under I have is 7 tackles for loss for South Carolina. Well, if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I'm terrified of this matchup. Absolutely terrified. What do I think Ole Miss's biggest weakness is? I think it's the offensive line. What do I think South Carolina's biggest strength is? Rushing the passer. With all due respect to Wake Forest and the nearly 33,000 paid attendants who opted to go to that game instead of staying home and listening to Tom Brenneman call that game on the CW, this is Ole Miss's first true road game, in my opinion. Okay. Communicating on that offensive line, I think is going to be difficult for Ole Miss. I do. LSU did that well against South Carolina, but that's a group that, as we have talked about a lot, it's got 2 first-round tackles, and it really helps when you have those anchors on the outside. You've got 4 guys on that offensive line with at least 3 years of experience. Like, I even thought Kyle Kennard had his moments in that game, too.
For sure.
It's still, like, he still was an animal, and obviously that led to a couple of those penalties. But, man, like, Ole Miss doesn't have those anchors at the tackle spots to – like, I don't feel particularly great about them being the driving force. Oh my gosh, we look back and they had all this, they had perfect film or something like that. We're not talking about these guys as future NFL prospects in the same way that we do with some of these other teams in a potential matchup like this. So I don't know that they're going to be able to consistently protect against Kennard and Stewart, as well as Tonka Hemingway, TJ Sanders. Those guys have been really good on the interior as well. So how does Lane combat that? That's a real question. You have probably more reps of Caden Prieskorn in pass pro, which, look, if he's not going to be featured in the passing game, you might as well put him there in pass protection. I know he had the big catch late down the stretch, but I thought he was going to be a whole lot more involved, and that just hasn't necessarily been his role this year. So I don't know. He's somebody that could provide valuable reps in pass pro. That's been a strength of his. It's one of the reasons why he was so attracted to Ole Miss in the portal was his ability to block more so in the run blocking, but it's only had 10 snaps in pass protection all year. So I'm not sure that they want to do that. Maybe you rely on your backs to be able to get more of a chip, which I think Lane would prefer to have Matt Jones doing that rather than Henry Parrish. So kind of make note of that split and how maybe that tips Ole Miss's hand a little bit in ways that they don't like to do, though maybe with how quickly they operate, how little they want to be able to substitute mid-series, maybe that creates some mismatches. I don't know. You can pray that you can execute some of these screens to your backs and hope that that's going to combat the South Carolina pass rush. But that's not really something that they've done a whole lot of since Jackson Dart came in. They did more of that with throwing to the backs with Matt Corral, but that's just not been an MO of Jackson Dart. Like, if you kind of think about what he does in some of those panic moments, it's not a lot of that check down stuff. It's kind of, I'm going to find my way with my legs. Maybe I'll make an off-platform throw, but that's been a little bit more his MO. So I don't know. Maybe we're going to see bunch sets with quick hitters to outside receivers. Hope that your guys can block in space, something like that. I don't know, but perhaps the only saving grace for Ole Miss in this game is that it lost last week, and we saw those flaws. South Carolina's coming off a bye. They're going to get Lenore Sellers back after he missed the Akron game. They had Robbie Ashford out there for that. So you're getting your starting quarterback in theory. TBD on if he finishes a game, because that's been a struggle so far for him. I think this is a down-to-the-wire game that South Carolina covers. But Ole Miss does still have the number 1 run defense in America. Take it for what it is. Competition's been lighter, certainly playing a part in those numbers. But I think that's going to play a pivotal role in this one because they can play gap discipline. I think they can dare South Carolina to be able to throw the football. So somewhat reluctantly, I'm going to go Ole Miss to survive 24-20 because I just can't imagine getting here on Sunday and talking about how Ole Miss, after it had its best preseason ranking since the Richard Nixon administration, is 0-2 to start SEC play. I can't see that playing out. And by the way, even if that happens in the 12-team playoff era, I have already mentally eliminated Ole Miss from that conversation just because, like, if you lose to start off SEC play against Kentucky and South Carolina, and then you think you're going to rattle off 6 consecutive wins when you've got games at LSU and you've got a game against Georgia at home coming up, forget about it. So, again, like we talked about with Mizzou, it's kind of put up or shut up time, even though there is more of that grace there.
I'm right there with you, right? It's that, right now for Ole Miss, every single game could be the loss that, takes you out of the playoff conversation, unfortunately. And part of that is just how many good teams there are in the SEC, and even more so how many undefeated teams there are in terms of teams that don't have that conference loss to give, right? And so, point being, like, I really have a lot of respect for the environment at South Carolina. That was insane for an 11 a.m. kickoff for game day. I know it's not game day. I will trigger a bit of the PTSD with South Carolina fans and quote Brian Kelly here, but positively. The transitive property is what he said after that game. Okay, you guys were able to smoke Kentucky.
Transitive property is a mess already in SEC. Well,
you guys were able to smoke Kentucky, and they were able to hang with Ole Miss. So you got to look yourself in the mirror and say, hey, we at least got a shot here. Okay. And I think you hit on what that is. In that game against Kentucky, we said, oh, let's wait on this pass rush. They might be pretty good. They are. I think they are. I think they have a legitimately good defense. I have said enough once again about Dowell Loggins. Now, that being said, whatever the quarterback situation is, okay, we, for like the first time that I can remember, got an actual game plan built around Robbie Ashford against Akron, and it's Akron, but
it's Joe Moorhead, though, so let's be nice. Let's be really nice.
And I'll give him more credit for that. You beat an established head coach. He looked great. He had 300+ yards of offense.
Very.
So all I'm saying there is, if your quarterback goes down, that doesn't mean you just go to the locker room. Okay, you have an established backup. You need to trust him. If a quarterback for South Carolina can take snaps and consistently put together a game plan, first off, I have them covering in this game. Let me start there. Second, I think they can win this.
You have South Carolina or Ole Miss
Carolina.
covering?
Sorry, I think South Carolina is like Ole Miss is not going to cover. There you go. So yeah, I first off think that regardless of what they do, I think it's going to be within 9. If they can consistently make adjustments and keep their quarterback position consistent and not like turn whoever into a running back, I think that's a really big deal for them. Because at the end of the day, if you look at the style of offense that Kentucky succeeds at, right, it is the actual old school smash mouth 3 yards in a cloud of dust stuff, right? Because, and Vandergriff was awesome in that game. Don't get me wrong. Vandergriff made some great plays. But if Mark Stoops had his druthers, every game would be like the Georgia game. The only real difference in terms of game flow of those two games was a 4th down decision, right? So that being said, you've seen the blueprint of one of these teams that can play smash mouth football and kind of out tough Ole Miss, right? And that was at home last week for Ole Miss. It'll be in your environment where you've already stepped up and played really well against LSU that had the first round tackles. And I mean, they were forcing false starts. LSU looked, scrambled. So this game for sure says a lot about Lane Kiffin, unfortunately, because we talked about this years ago during the 22 season. And I said, I just don't know how serious this guy is in terms of winning a national championship. And I think Ole Miss is a great place for him. How he approaches this, okay, this is why I don't have any doubts about Kirby Smart for this week. Because when Kirby Smart takes that loss, that next week you are getting angry Kirby Smart. That's why I did not even prepare the concept of Auburn winning. Lane Kiffin didn't do that. In fact, Lane Kiffin starts to pout from what we've seen from the old Lane Kiffin, okay? The new quote-unquote Lane Kiffin isn't a guy who goes undefeated. We're not expecting that out of him. What we're expecting is for him to be a little bit more mature and understand that this game evolves so many hundreds of thousands of people, millions of people beyond him. And that's what he couldn't do last time he was in the coaching mill rumors. His team lost kind of a weird game, right, at LSU last time. And the wheels started to come off during that season, right? And so point being, this is a game where Ole Miss's goals could end right here at the very beginning of October. And now that you have those expectations, again, you can't run from them. Now, that being said, if you play this physical South Carolina team that has hung with LSU, smoked Kentucky, a really physical team on the road, you're hearing da-da-da-da in your sleep for the next 2 weeks. That stuff, it's like Rocky Top, but techno. It's scary. It's
yeah. Oh, no doubt. Like this is a huge response game. It is going to say a lot if you are the aggressor, not just, we're not talking opening script aggressor, because that's very well documented. If Ole Miss marches down the field and scores in 5 plays, probably
likely they will do that because that's what they do. That's what they've always done.
Yeah, color me shocked. All right, that's not nobody will be surprised if that happens, and if they do a good job handling that atmosphere early on, that will not be crazy. Okay, that would be something we have seen so many times from Lane Kiffin. What will impress me is if they come out and keep their foot on the gas and never let this game look like South Carolina has any sort of hope. if they're playing Sandstorm in the second half of this game and it's just lackluster and it's like, oh, this is kind of sad, that'll be a testament to Ole Miss's response. And I don't necessarily know that that happens, because I do think that there are legitimate questions about that matchup. Like I really don't know how those Ole Miss tackles are going to handle this. And if Jackson Dart is able to stare down that pressure and not be seeing ghosts in the second half of this game and look like a much better version of himself, that will be really impressive.
Yeah.
It will. And people don't want to hear it of like, oh, like any given week going on the road in the SEC is really tough. Buddy, tell me that Michigan would just not be crap in the bed having to go on the road to face South Carolina with those edge rushers in that building with what we've seen from them so far. Like, it doesn't mean that Michigan would definitively lose that matchup, but yeah, you better believe Michigan would feel accomplished if it came away with a win. So like, people are going to say, oh, it doesn't mean that, if you beat South Carolina, that means you're on track. Like, if the Joel Klatts of the world are going to come out and be like, oh, I guess we got to praise Ole Miss now for winning an SEC road game. It's like, well, yeah, if you actually look at this matchup and you look at the things they're going to have to overcome, a lot of which are self-doing, this is self-inflicted, I should say, those issues at tackle, then to me, it'll be impressive. So I hope we get a good game. This has potential to be the game of the day. Yeah, it really does. It'd be awesome if we,
and
if
I'll
we
say
saw that
really
play
quick
out.
on that too. Like, Shane Beamer is another guy who, a little bit younger and more fun of a head coach, right? Just as we saw, to your point, the opening script touchdown out of Ole Miss, the dunking on the Kentucky basketball, and then not a lot after that last time. Shane Beamer has been a guy historically who sometimes can be a little bit up and down. Their last adversity was this LSU game. I will say, I really like how Shane Beamer handled that game at the end. I think he moved on pretty quickly. I don't think he pouted and soaked and said, well, if things were different, this would be that. And furthermore, looking past this game, we have Alabama next week, right? So this really goes a lot to show this is a South Carolina team that truly, truly, truly everybody had counted out, right? They shocked us a little bit against Kentucky. They even shocked us against LSU. There's another opportunity because, again, not goal is going to Bryant-Denny Stadium. We have proven it's not fun. What you don't want to do is have this almost win against LSU. What's up?
So I was going to say South Carolina and Kentucky. I'm looking back at that game now and realizing that South Carolina and Kentucky have the most potential to be the any given week teams that could just like hang because of the advantages of what they have.
I mean, how funny would it be if we go back to that game and these are two teams at the end of the year that are like ranked and we're like, wow, these teams are actually really good because Ole Miss already has the win. Or sorry, Kentucky already has the win. South Carolina almost got it against LSU. And so point being, I really like the message that like this is a legitimate team that everybody in the media counted out. You cannot, nobody was saying. We were talking about that with Brad, where it's like, what are the expectations this season? Like, we just don't. We're so there's not a Rattler or like a Wells or a Leggett to be super excited about. They weren't really sure about Rocket. So point being, like this could be a really fun season. It's already a really fun season for South Carolina. Let's keep it going. And I would say I don't think Ole Miss is going to cover. I think I'm right there with you. They could turn this into a rock fight at home. I think that would be massive. And yeah, like I said, then you start looking, the Bama game, Oklahoma game. They got 4 ranked games in a row. Like this is really this is where Beamer is going to really show what he's about as a head coach. And it could start with a win against Ole Miss, honestly.
Could definitely see that scenario. That is very much in their sights, and I think South Carolina fans know it.